Welcome back, everyone, and today we sit down with the legendary Professor Ricardo Almeida, a fifth-degree black belt under Renzo Gracie, a multiple-time national Brazilian champion, no-gi world, and Pan Am champion. He's a school owner and a coach to some of the UFC's most elite fighters. His first fight was completely by chance and under extraordinary circumstances. Hear him share his story, what fighting has taught him about himself, and what he sees when a new fighter walks into the gym.
So my first fight, I don't think I ever really wanted to do MMA, to be honest. Like I've done jiu-jitsu my entire life, or I started when I was 15 back in Brazil. And I moved here to the U.S. when I was 20 to teach at Renzo Gracie Academy that he had in Philly. And for sure, growing up or coming up in jiu-jitsu, that's when they had the first couple of UFCs. But, to me, it was pretty barbaric. It wasn't so much like a sport as it was a spectacle. It was awesome that we got to see the, back then the effectiveness of jiu-jitsu. We saw Renzo Gracie was a little guy fighting all these other guys. And as the UFC evolved, we started to get like all these athletes, wrestlers and, judo guys and boxers. And it was still a little bit more Schwartz versus more Schwartz. But to me, it was like pretty barbaric, to be honest. I never really liked the whole culture of like MMA. You know what I mean? Like you go into a boxing gym and everyone's trying to beat each other up, and guys are like trash talking to each other, and everyone's just it just doesn't seem like super legitimate to me. And if you walk into jiu-jitsu school, is a very different environment, or even if you walk into a wrestling program. I remember the first time I went to a wrestling program, to a wrestling practice, I was like, wow, like this is how a jiu-jitsu class should be run. Like so much drilling, so much movement, so much conditioning into a wrestling practice. But anyway, back to fighting. I moved to the U.S. and Renzo was fighting in Japan in Pride, and his late brother, Ryan Gracie, had a fight against Sakuraba. It was probably one of the biggest fights back in the day. And Sakuraba just got inducted into the UFC Hall of Fame. He was a legendary Japanese fighter, and Ryan wanted to go early to Japan to just get used to the time difference, and it's winter time there. So me, Ryan, and Luca Atala, the editor of Gracie Magazine, we went for a little over 2 weeks to Tokyo, and we were there training. Hickson was there at the time, so one day we got to train with Hickson, which was pretty cool. But about 3 days before the event, this Brazilian guy, Alan Goes, was supposed to fight, and he got hurt, and he had to pull out of the event. And we were there, and they're like, oh, we're going to bring someone from Brazil. And I can't remember. I think it was Luca. Luca's like, Ricardo, why don't you do it? You're already here. And, Ryan, was all behind it. And I'm like, all right, if Renzo thinks I'm ready, just call Renzo. If Renzo thinks I'm ready, I'll do it. I don't care. I just loved competing, I loved competing. And, I competed in Brazil a lot in the gi. When I came to the U.S., the big-time jiu-jitsu gi competitions weren't around. So I started doing all these super fights in local grappling events. So I'll compete against wrestlers, against sambo black belts, against guys from other martial arts, that the game was so different than jiu-jitsu. So that aspect was super appealing to me. And they called Renzo, and Renzo was like, oh, so Ricardo wants to do it, just get him in. But this was pride, I really I had no idea what I was doing. I was 23 years old. I wasn't my very first fight was at Saitama Arena, which is, I think it was 25,000 people. And, at Pride back in the day, they had this massive production. They introduced all the fighters before. I was so naive that I walked out and I had my, a t-shirt on. I was like, you think they let me fight with a t-shirt? So I could have a little bit better grip. And I'm in there in the ring, and the referee comes to me, like, take your shirt off. I'm like, no, I want to go with the shirt on. And they're like, no, take your shirt off. I'm like, no, I want to do it with my shirt on. It's okay, no? And I just really didn't know what I was doing, and I ended up winning that fight. But I think it was beginner's luck. I really think so. I mean, I had the skills from jiu-jitsu, but I had never done any sparring or anything like that. I just kind of knew how to throw a jab and keep someone off of me. Of course I had takedowns, and I had jiu-jitsu by, and the fight ended up being standing the whole time. And it was 2 10-minute rounds. This guy was a very experienced Japanese fighter. No weight class, so he was probably like 220. I was like maybe like 200, you know. So he outweighed me. He was shorter, but like way thicker than me. It was fun, you know. Now looking back, it was just like a typical like young guy just being crazy and not knowing what they're getting themselves into. You know, some people go jump off of like cliffs, some kids go race cars, and you know, I fought in pride. And I came back to the U.S. and it was right around the time that that Zuffa bought the UFC. So one day I'm hitting the bag at Renzo's gym, and Dana White walks in with Lorenzo, and they were trying to sign Renzo, and Renzo couldn't fight. But I got these two kids. You could sign these two kids. It was me and Metzger. So me and Metzger ended up signing with the UFC. But you know, if it wasn't for me being in Japan with Renzo's brother, and you know, just them like kind of pushing me over the edge, I would have never done MMA. I loved being around it. I loved, you know, helping the guys get ready for the fight. I cornered Renzo a couple of times, but I never really had like any wish to fight, you know.
So I think this is a classic story of you are who you hang around with, because you kind of just fell into fighting for pride.
Yeah, in Portuguese we say that birds that hang out with bats sleep upside down. So for sure.
That is amazing that was your first. I think you didn't even recognize probably the sheer grandness of the situation. I mean, I guess you were so used to being around Renzo and that type of lifestyle that it wasn't such a shock for you. Maybe ignorance is bliss in that situation.
Yeah, for sure. I think that, you know, everyone that fights or everyone that competes, even if you cross over into some other type of competition, it's just another competition. You know, like you're not, you know, I definitely wasn't sitting there and like, oh my gosh, it's such a huge arena, you know, oh my gosh, it's Pride FC, or oh my gosh, it's my first fight ever. Like, it wasn't. It was like, to me, it was just another competition. Of course, it was different rules, and you know, there is nothing like fighting MMA. You know, like, I think that probably even wrestlers that wrestle their whole life, you know, for sure they always do so well. But you know, fighting MMA is just a whole different animal from any other sport. I mean, you've had plenty of fights, so you know that it's like nothing else. And I wasn't like ready for that aspect, like the whole mental aspect of being in a fist fight with someone that has every skill and will to beat you. You know, it's nothing like being in a street fight, if you will. But yeah, for sure, I wasn't sitting there and thinking, oh my, you know, this is like the biggest thing I've ever done. It was just, to me, another competition.
Well, I feel like you've been conditioned from competing so much. Same with wrestlers. That is it's a good background to have. You're used to that one-on-one competition. But, I mean, you kind of answered my next question is, I always ask wrestlers or people who have had extensive experience in another art if fighting was a smooth transition for them, or was it a shock to your system once you got in there? Did you realize that this isn't like jiu-jitsu? This is someone really trying to hurt me?
Yeah, so I think when I started fighting, and you know, I won my first fight, and I was like, all right, like, I could do this, you know. And it wasn't until my second fight that I actually ended up losing a decision. And I fought Matt Lennon, who was a silver medalist in the Olympics. He was a Greco-Roman wrestler. And it was the first time I felt someone like outdo me in a competition. Like, I've lost jiu-jitsu matches before, but I've never felt someone be able to control me on the feet and on the ground. And Matt Lennon was like suplexing me. He was taking me down, and I couldn't get up when I wanted to, you know. And I think that, like, your first loss in MMA, like the first time you get your butt kicked and everyone's seeing it, I think people do one of two things. You know, they either go back and they realize that it's just a loss that you learn and you get better from it, or you go back and you just kind of sulk on it, and you know what I mean, like, oh, you know, like, you come up with a bunch of excuses where, oh, my coaches didn't teach me this, you know, or I was sick, or, you know, my mind wasn't right. And the moment you open that door with the excuses, like, it only gets bigger, you know, like. And so it was you realize that you're not Superman. You realize that you're not unbeatable. You know, like everyone thinks they're unbeatable until they go out there and someone just manhandles them or someone knocks them out. And then you have to go back to the drawing board and you have to like, all right, wow, like I could lose. Like I could get dominated. I could get knocked out. There's so many ways that I could lose. To me, it was a motivator. I just always wanted to be ready. I always wanted to go out there and do well, just for the, you know, the technical aspect of it, the mental aspect of it. But I see with a lot of fighters, and especially nowadays, you see these guys, they're athletic, they come in, they're fighting lower level guys, and they're knocking everyone out, and they're doing really good. And next thing you know, they fight someone with a little more experience, someone who's been around, and they just get manhandled, and then they start making a bunch of excuses, you know. And it's tough. It's tough to deal with an MMA loss. It's not like playing soccer that you get scored 2 goals on and you lose. You know, it's very tough on your ego losing in MMA for sure.
I always say that I think the hardest part about fighting is you have to be so confident in yourself to do it, I think. But you also have to have an awareness of your limitations, and it's hard to balance, I think. Or at least for me, I had a hard time with setbacks maintaining that confidence in the future. And a lot of guys, I think, are the opposite, where they have a hard time being humbled and learning from it going forward without making excuses. I always say that you kind of find pieces of yourself in fights. And is there a specific moment in a fight that, or a memory that you have of a fight where you found something about yourself, learned something about yourself that kind of sticks out over the years?
It's been a while. My last fight was almost 10 years ago now, so 9 years ago. But you know, I remember one fight. I always remember my losses more than I remember my wins. You know, of course, you could talk about your wins. But I remember I fought this Russian guy. No one really knew too much about this guy. And, you know, we started fighting. I was feeling really good. And I was like, I could finish this guy. And I was super aggressive. It was early in my career. I was very aggressive. I went for all these submissions. And I caught him in a bunch of submissions, and he just kept escaping and escaping and escaping. And every time he escaped, we'd get back to our feet, and I'll get hit, and I get a little more tired. And I think I lost my mouthpiece, and I had like this real thin mouthpiece, and he hit me, and he broke my tooth in half. And the chip of my tooth bit into my lip, and it split my lip, and there was blood like everywhere. And this was in the first round or the second round, I can't remember, but I remember clearly was just sitting in the stool and feeling like all this blood just, you know, gushing from my mouth. And I was like, man, like I don't want the referee to come here and see all this blood, because, you know, they may stop the fight. There's like a pretty big cut. So I just kind of sucked my lip in, and that metallic taste of blood just going into my throat, and me just kind of drinking it just to try to give myself a chance to go back into the second round and try to beat this guy. And I ended up getting, you know, like TKO'd. He punched me and I landed on my knees, and the referee came in and stopped the fight. But I just remember not giving up. You know, I'm drinking this blood, and I'm just gonna give myself a chance to get one more round with this guy. And I think that's what you have to do. You know, like no matter what bad situation you find yourself in a fight, like that desire to win, that willingness to kind of put your body through whatever pain or whatever discomfort you're going through at the time, and just knowing that that's temporary, but, you know, trying your best, like that's always going to stick with you, whether the outcome is good or not. I think that's something that I've learned, you know, like, and I've had even worse situations in life that I've had to deal with, but just going back to that of just being able to put yourself through pain and discomfort just to try to win, I think that's such a huge lesson from fighting. But that moment of sitting in the stool, you know, drinking like the blood coming from my lips, and that metallic taste, like I'll never forget it, you know.
No, I guess on the opposite end of the spectrum, was there ever a moment where you were disappointed in yourself?
Yeah, I think, you know, all the losses, all the wins, you know, like I've always been very hard on myself, like always thinking that I could do better, you know, like when I got into the sport, you know, it happened by chance, as we already talked about, but as I stayed in the sport, like I wanted to be the best I can be. I wanted to be a world champion, and every win moves you closer to that goal, and every loss pushes you further from that goal. And I think a lot of the losses, like I've held on to them like so to this day, like I hold them like close to my chest with like a huge sense of regret. Like, man, maybe if I would have done this different, maybe if I would have done that different, and that's what I try to pass on to the young fighters. It's like, man, like you only get to do this once, like 10, 15 years from now, you're going to be like me. You're going to be looking back, like wishing that maybe you would have done more, like, and our guys are awesome. You know what I mean? Like Corey, Frankie, these guys are some of the hardest working. I'll call them kids. They're kids to me in a way, Like if they're not kids themselves, they're like kind of like my kids. They're like my little brothers, But they work so hard, perhaps way harder than I ever did. But still, like I look back and I'm like, man, like I could have always done more. Or maybe if you couldn't have trained harder, it's the decision making at the fight itself, So for sure, I look back with a lot of great lessons, but of course, just like everything, you look back with a lot of regret and things that you wish you would have done different. But I've learned to live with it. It's not something that it gets me upset. It's just like, man, like I should have done that better, like for sure.
Hindsight's 20/20.
Yeah.
They always say, especially in fighting, it's always a game of inches.
It's always easy to make the right decision after.
Yeah, exactly, right? So Renzo obviously has been a big influence in your life and your career. What would you say is the most important thing that you took from him?
Renzo is a very unique person because on one side he is probably one of the most giving people you ever meet. Like he'll take the shirt off his back and give it to a stranger. If you meet him, he'll make you feel like you've known him your entire life. Like he'll become your best friend, and everyone loves him for it. But and that side is the side that everyone sees, but the side that not too many people see is just how meticulous he's always been with his technique. Like his technique has always been so I don't want to say superior because then it's comparing to everyone else, but just so perfect. Like to this day, like there's so many things that Renzo taught me that I hold on to the image of him doing and the feeling of him maybe showing me a guard pass, and I still don't feel like I do it that way. Like Renzo in all his creativity and he has this search for the perfect technique, like the one technique that's gonna solve all problems, like so it's kind of like a magician or a wizard, if you will, like always finding the perfect spell like to deal with a certain situation, and that's how he looks at technique. Like there's always a way to catch someone here. There's always a better way. Like no technique is ever perfect. Like you can always make it better. So that aspect of Renzo, it's something that I've always held on to. Like there's always a way to figure something out. Like there's always, whether it's on the mats or whether, for the guys fighting now, it's, on the tactic side of it, on the strategy side of it, no one is unbeatable. You can always figure out a way to beat them, and no one technique is deadly. Like you could always figure out a way to like not get caught with a punch, or escape this guy's guillotine, or stop someone's takedown. And I think as far as Renzo, so those two things, like to always treat people nice and always be good to people, like because he always comes back to you. And on the technical side of it too, it's not necessarily being a perfectionist, but like always seeking a better way. Like there's always there's an answer to every problem. Like there's a key to every lock. If you work hard enough, you can figure it out.
I can definitely see that in your instruction. Like you've definitely been one of my favorite instructors. I've had the privilege of learning from you. You're so organized and structured with your thoughts and your instruction, which that's what I learned. How I learned striking was a very structured way of learning, building from the ground up, and that's exactly how you teach jiu-jitsu as well. Obviously, you have a passion for it. Do you enjoy coaching and instructing more than competing yourself now?
No, I still enjoy competing. Like I love competing, even if it's just, like a row here that becomes like a little bit competitive, for not so much for beating someone or outdoing someone, but just for the challenge of myself. Definitely, since I've stopped fighting, I've done a bunch of jiu-jitsu competitions. Like I won in the Masters division. Like I won Nogi Worlds, I've won like Nogi Pinems because it's here in New York, multiple times. But it's like it's not the same as fighting in the UFC, and it's not necessarily the venue. It doesn't matter what I do now. I only get slower and worse. You know what I mean? Like I'm no longer up until when I was fighting, I was always getting better, and I feel like my jiu-jitsu is getting better. But like I could feel the slowdown in the speed. I could feel that I don't train nowhere near the same amount of time. So my my endurance and my explosiveness, back probably like 10 years ago, your husband Corey, I could probably grapple him and just put a lot of energy and strength into a grappling round. Now if I grapple with Corey, I have to, it's like I'm grappling with the Hulk. Like I have to be very defensive and play the right cards and, plan almost every movement, So I love competing, but it definitely has a very different feel than it did for me as when, I was only a competitor, As far as coaching, like I love it, like when someone walks in, whether it's a little kid that just walked in, or whether it's, I remember, when I met Corey, and the first day that Corey came to New Jersey after the Ultimate Fighter show, the first day that Frankie walked in, the first day I met Eddie, like all these guys, I remember like the very first day. Frankie I already knew about, Eddie I already knew about, Corey I knew about the show. So I remember it's like you walk into a garage and a brand new sports car is in the garage. You know what I mean? Like you can't wait to get in and just, put it in first, second, third, and fourth gear and just rev the engine. And somehow it feels like that every time I'm with the kids, with the boys, with the fighters. It's like I feel like a driver in a way, and they kind of feel like Ferraris and Lamborghinis and stuff because they could do things that I never could. And to be able to guide them through these things. And of course, a lot of their instruction comes from Mark, they train with Nick, like they do all these different instructions, but I see them so much further ahead than they even see themselves, like that. And it takes time. It takes 5, 6, Corey's been around for 5, 6, 7 years. Frankie's been around for 10 years. Eddie's been around for, 6, 7, 8 years. It takes a long time to develop these guys. And I enjoy that process very much. Just like I enjoy with the little kids. There's been little kids that started with me when they were 4, 5, 6 years old. And then, they go away for a little bit. They start doing school sports. Then they come back and they train and they become teenagers and they're gone. And then they come back, or sometimes they go to college and then they come back. But I've seen from the little kid all the way up through the UFC champion, it's like a huge spectrum. So when I look at a student body, it could be 300, 400, 500 people. Like when they come in, like I kind of like, all right, you're here in the spectrum, but like you don't see it yet, but you could go all the way there. Like I get so excited for how much people improve over the years, and to facilitate that improvement, and to see the confidence that they get, to see them overcoming like their doubts. Because even a guy like Corey, you know what I mean? Like if you ask him, man, like how is your jiu-jitsu, to be honest, he's not gonna be very flattering towards his idea of his grappling, as probably he is with his striking and his wrestling. Now I think that he's come such a long way, and he's gotten so good, especially like the last year or so. But sometimes how a fighter sees himself and how us coaches see them is different, because we're looking at the possibility as well, and we've looked how far they've come. Whereas the fighter, you always have that urgency of like how well you do it in the training, how well you did in the training today, or how you think you should be doing that day. So to your question, like as much as I enjoy competing, like I think that's a part of me that's kind of done. Like I do it every once in a while. I enjoy the training very much. Like I was just injured and I couldn't train for a long time, and being back on the mats, like I'm just such a much happier person. Like it affects every other area of my life in a positive way. Like I'm more focused on like my work and my responsibilities. I'm a better father. I think I'm a better significant other. But without a doubt, as far as high level performance, to me these days it's the boys, and it's playing a small part in helping guide them. But for sure, like when I see them going out there and some of the incredible things that these guys do, like Corey's last big win, Eddie had like a hiccup, and then he did this crazy sweep to finish with the guy, like even if they knock someone out, like Corey knocked somebody out, like there was nothing jiu-jitsu on that fight. But it's amazing to be a part of it and to see them growing and to see how hard they work. For sure, it's as far as the sport, it's one of my main drivers right now.
So would you say coaching athletes is your calling?
I think just coaching, just helping. Like I don't really do much. Like they do it themselves. Like they do all the work. I just, through the experience and for no other reason than I was around before them, like that's the only reason why I get to instruct. Like there's really like nothing really special. Like I don't have any secrets, like there's no special sauce or special secrets that we keep, hidden in the back at the school. It's like I said, it's like you see a little kid come in and they could barely make eye contact with you, and then a couple of months later they high-fiving you, look you in the eye, and then a couple of months later you see their skill just go to, like I have some little 10-year-olds here that roll better than the adults. And it's amazing to see, and they don't only roll better. It's not just their skill that's better. They listen better when they're being coached. Like there's no frustration when they get things wrong. They just go out and they try it again, and they just keep improving. And with the professional fighters, that's a small part of what I do. But I think without a doubt, as far as the high level performance in jiu-jitsu, it's probably the most exciting. As well as, some of the guys that go and compete at, Nogi Pan Ams and Nogi Worlds. But I think that nowadays I'm less connected to that aspect, even though I still have a couple of guys that do it, and more connected to the MMA side than, perhaps I've ever been. Yeah. But without a doubt, like I think my calling is to just use jiu-jitsu to interact with people and then just, just help them see a better way.
I mean, that's what I love about martial arts. Obviously, the personal development that comes with it, I think it makes everyone a better person. I love seeing how you can look at a fighter or a student and it's like you're passing along this art to them. And you can see in them, like Mark Henry is the boxing coach, you're the jiu-jitsu coach. You can see how they embody both their styles, and you can see in your style that you got from someone else, and it's just passed down and down through generations, which is pretty cool. It's like like you said, you're creating a car or even a video game character of like all these beautiful techniques that would be lost otherwise.
For sure. Which
is the coolest part about it. I mean, it's amazing what you're doing, and passing along the art to more students every day. And it's really good seeing someone who is passionate about that and the personal development that comes along with that. And, obviously you're doing it in two different arenas, professionally at the highest levels, and then the everyday hobbyists, which is an amazing thing to do. So we appreciate that. And I appreciate you coming on the show today and sharing your story.
Anytime. Thank you so much.